President, I'm going to be speaking in just a few minutes on another matter. And I believe I have time at 1 o'clock. With nobody else seeking the floor at the moment, I would just add to what the distinguished senator from Texas just said. And I discussed this with him off the floor after he spoke. There's a concern about what might be in the omnibus bill, not in the COVID bill, and they're here on a Saturday and tomorrow and Sunday or whenever we finish, we're rushing through. I'd remind everybody that we were ready to bring up the appropriations bills that make up the omnibus in July. The House representatives had sent over in June, had sent over their COVID bill. We could have brought it up then. We could have started having a series of votes. It might have taken us 2 or 3 weeks of having votes every day on different parts of their proposal, Democrats' proposals, the Republicans' proposals, the appropriations proposals, and vote them up or down. I had urged that. Republicans had the majority in the U.S. Senate. If they didn't like proposals the Democrats had, they could vote them down. But instead, they seemed almost terrified to vote. But there was a reason. We would have had to take 2 or 3 weeks to vote all this up or down, but we had to take instead the time to put through lifetime judgeships of people who have been recommended by special interest groups. That's beneath the United States Senate. But unfortunately, these people have gotten lifetime jobs with high pay. Hundreds of thousands, millions of Americans have lost their jobs, have lost their place to live, are unable to educate their children, and hundreds of thousands have lost their lives. This is not the U.S. Senate's finest hour. We should have been doing our job and voting these things up or down. I know some may be afraid of what they had to vote. Well, so what? I've cast over 16,000 votes. Not all of them were easy, but I never thought there was any question about what I would vote. Now, Madam President, the hour of 1 o'clock has arrived. I will claim my time, and I'm going to speak about the Department of Justice and the Office of the Attorney General. William Barr's second tenure as Attorney General is coming to an end. At that time, it's important for the Senate to reflect upon his legacy and upon the challenges now facing the Department of Justice. As we all know, the Office of Attorney General fills a unique role within our system of government. It was created by the Judiciary Act of 1789. And in its creation, it was obvious the Attorney General is not a traditional member of the President's cabinet. Supreme Court Justice James Iredell observed in 1792 that the position is not called the Attorney General of the President, but the Attorney General of the United States. This is because an Attorney General's client is not the President. Attorney General's client is the American people. All of us. All of us. An Attorney General's duty is not to defend the President, but to uphold the rule of law and do so with integrity and independence. Now, we know that President Trump has a very different view. He views the Office of Attorney General as an extension of his political power to be wielded like a weapon to further his agenda. He believes it exists to benefit him personally, to target his opponents, to protect him and his friends. And his view stands in stark contrast to everything the Attorney General is supposed to represent. It came as no surprise then that during his nomination hearing, Mr. Barr was questioned about which type of Attorney General he would be, the President's lawyer or an impartial pursuer of justice. Now, Mr. Barr was adamant in that hearing that while he may sympathize with the President's policy choices, his role as a policy advisor would be distinct from that of the nation's chief law enforcement officer. If confirmed, he assured all of us his job would not be to protect the President. Now, Madam President, 30 years ago, I voted for Mr. Barr to serve as Attorney General to then President George H.W. Bush. I had my disagreements with him at that time, in fact, several. But I voted for him. But when I heard in late 2018 that President Trump intended to nominate him for a second tenure as Attorney General, frankly, I was hopeful. After the short yet disastrous tenure of a totally unqualified acting Attorney General who eagerly bent to the will of President Trump, I was hopeful that Mr. Barr would restore some independence to the office. But after careful consideration and listening to his testimony at his nomination hearing, I voted no for his confirmation. Mr. Barr has long held expansive views of executive power. And prior to his nomination, he shared those views with this was prior to his nomination. He shared those views with the President in a bizarre 19-page memorandum, making the case that a president can obstruct a criminal investigation with near impunity. It was clear to me that Mr. Barr's views would be weaponized by President Trump, a man who derides any limits on his authority. The president, I said at that time, needs a much tighter leash. By any measure, the last 2 years have been worse than I feared. Time and again, Attorney General Barr has acted in the best interest of Donald Trump, not in the best interest of the country. He's intervened, he's overruled career prosecutors, only in cases to benefit the president and his friends. He's departed from department norms. He's misrepresented the department's work. He's eroded public trust in the department as a result, and I'll speak to just a handful of examples. In late 2019, a jury on overwhelming evidence convicted former Trump campaign advisor Roger Stone for obstructing a bipartisan congressional investigation and lying under oath and witness tampering. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury convicted him. So consistent with sentencing guidelines that apply to everybody, prosecutors recommended a 7 to 9 year sentence. President Trump immediately took to Twitter to criticize the prosecution. And just hours later, after he had tweeted his objections, Attorney General Barr intervened. He overruled the prosecutors. He disregarded the sentencing guidelines that are supposed to apply to anybody. What happened next reminded me of something Judge Michael Mukasey said when he testified in support of Mr. Barr at his confirmation hearing. Judge Mukasey said if Mr. Barr ever failed to serve with independence, he would find a mound of resignations on his desk. Well, in this instance, all 4 career prosecutors withdrew from the case. In fact, two resigned from the Justice Department altogether. And at sentencing, Judge Amy Berman Jackson took the rare step of defending both the career prosecutors and their sentencing recommendation. And she stated that it was true to the record. It was in accordance with law and Department of Justice policy. Attorney General Barr's intervention left me with just one question. Could anyone, other than the president's close friend, a man who, according to Judge Jackson, broke the law and was prosecuted for covering up for the president, receive such leniency from the Attorney General? I think the answer is pretty obvious. You're a friend of the president, the Attorney General is going to try to cover for you. Then there's former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. The Attorney General's intervention in the Flynn case went a step further. Despite the fact that Flynn had twice pled guilty to lying to the FBI, Mr. Barr's Justice Department moved to dismiss the case altogether, prompting the lead prosecutors to withdraw. The sentencing judge, Emmett Sullivan, ordered a review of the motion to drop the charges. He appointed a former federal judge, John Gleeson, to serve as an amicus curiae. Well, Judge Gleeson didn't mince words. He advised the court that Mr. Barr's grounds for seeking dismissal were conclusively disproven and amounted to, quote, an unconvincing effort to disguise as a legitimate a decision to dismiss that is based solely on the fact that Flynn is a political ally of President Trump. Not long afterward, President Trump fully pardoned Mr. Flynn from his conviction of the crime of lying. Now, many of Attorney General Barr's departures from department norms originated with his now infamous handling of the special counsel's report on Russian interference. The Mueller report amounted to a 448-page presentment of misconduct that reached the highest levels of the Trump campaign and administration. But the Attorney General's summary of the report, in fact, the only information he allowed the public to see for weeks, left Americans with the opposite impression that the report effectively exonerated the president, even though it did not. Special Counsel Mueller wrote to the Attorney General at the time, concerned that the Attorney General failed to capture his conclusions and created confusion to undermine public confidence in the investigation. Indeed, that appears to have been the Attorney General's intent, and many others agree. Federal Judge Reggie Walton wrote that the inconsistencies between his statements and the report caused the court to seriously question whether Attorney General Barr made a calculated attempt to influence public discourse about the Mueller report in favor of President Trump, despite findings in the redacted version of the Mueller report to the contrary. This remarkable statement from a sitting federal judge about a sitting attorney general is about as damning as it gets. Soon after, the Attorney General began falsely claiming that the investigation was started without any basis and was politically motivated. That's despite the fact that an exhaustive Inspector General's report refuted both of his claims. And the Attorney General was not content with simply mischaracterizing the Russia investigation. He launched counter-investigation into the Justice Department's own investigators. He personally traveled to Italy in a desperate attempt to dig up exculpatory evidence. Ignoring department policies, he regularly commented on the ongoing investigation led by U.S. Attorney John Durham. And documents from the Durham investigation were even shared with the White House according to the President's Chief of Staff. Then Durham's top aide abruptly resigned, reportedly due to pressure to release their findings before the election. In other words, they just broke all procedures because they wanted to help Donald Trump. And on top of that, the Attorney General did all this while he was ignoring a subpoena from the House of Representatives to obtain an unredacted copy of the Mueller report. In fact, Attorney General Barr has evaded transparency. He's impeded one standard congressional oversight, no matter the topic. He refused to testify before the House. He was held in contempt for refusing to respond to House subpoenas related to the administration's pretextual justification for adding a citizenship question to the census. He supported efforts to cover up President Trump's Ukraine scandal, for which the president was impeached. He supported the unprecedented purging of multiple independent inspectors general. And he rebuffed congressional oversight at every turn. Now, this may not bother some of my friends on the other side of the aisle now, but the political winds have already shifted. It harms all of us when congressional prerogatives are so blatantly disregarded. While Attorney General Barr has defended President Trump at seemingly every turn, he went a step further in September by attempting to literally defend the president's personal interests. The Attorney General moved to intervene and dismiss a civil defamation case that alleged that President Trump lied about a decades-old sexual assault, and a federal court flatly rejected the attempt. And Attorney General Barr's interventions on behalf of the president extended beyond legal issues to PR issues as well. At the height of a national reckoning on issues of racial injustice, the White House stated that it was the Attorney General who ordered the clearing of peaceful protesters at Lafayette Square. Barr denied he gave the order, but he did not deny that he encouraged it. Peaceful protesters were cleared with rubber bullets and tear gas so the president could stage a photo op in front of St. John's Church. It was a grotesque display of unnecessary force. Most recently, the Attorney General's obedience to the president resulted in him falsely claiming that mail-in ballots that have been used since the Civil War and relied upon by millions of Americans during this pandemic opened the floodgates to widespread fraud. Voting experts described his claims as farcical. In echoing the president's conspiracy theories, the Attorney General revealed how little he knew about basic election laws and the safeguards in place. And his apparent intent was not to inform the public, but to sow doubt among the public about the integrity of their vote. Attorney General Barr then rewrote the department's policy on election-related investigations, prompting the head of the department's election crimes branch to resign his post in protest. For each of these actions, Attorney General Barr was publicly badgered by President Trump to act, Now, maybe the Attorney General Barr believes he withstood the pressure. There may be some lines that he declined to cross, such as fabricating evidence of widespread voter fraud. But we can never excuse all the lines he did cross. Critically, when a president pressures an attorney general to serve their personal interests, it's all the more incumbent on the nation's top law enforcement officer to avoid any appearance of impropriety and to refuse the request, not to meet him halfway. Now, it brings me no joy to say this. I've known Attorney General Barr for a long time. But he has failed in his duty to impartially and equally uphold the rule of law. The Attorney General represents the United States, all of the 330 million Americans. Too often, the Attorney General felt he was going to only represent the interests of just one person. By serving as a yes man, when the law and the country and the department needed him to say no, Attorney General Barr has damaged the hallowed office he's temporarily occupied. And now the hard work to repair the damage has to begin. In November, the American people voted to take the country in a different direction. I served alongside President-elect Biden for decades in the Senate and on the Judiciary Committee. He understands the unique role of the Justice Department. I am convinced that President-elect Biden would never rely on the Justice Department to do his personal bidding the way President Trump has. No matter who the President-elect chooses as the next Attorney General, I have no doubt that he or she will operate with the utmost integrity, guided by the law and the facts. So as we begin to close the book on this dark chapter in our nation's history, with a pandemic that has left more than 310,000 Americans dead, with the outgoing president's relentless attacks on the foundations of our democracy, I'm hopeful that brighter days are ahead. I'm confident that we will again have government leaders focused on following the evidence and adhering to the rule of law, pursuing equal justice, acting in the best interests of the nation, all of us, not just of one person. The thousands of hardworking and dedicated men and women of the Justice Department deserve at least this much, as do all Americans. Indeed, the founding principles and traditions of the 230-year-old office of the Attorney General demand nothing less. Madam President, as there's nobody else seeking the floor right at the moment, let me just mention a personal observation. As a young law student at Georgetown, I was invited along with 3 or 4 other law students from different leading law schools. We were invited to meet with the then Attorney General. We were probably diverse in our opinions, but we were asked to be there because of our academic standing in our classes. And I remember sitting there with the Attorney General, and like it was yesterday. He talked about the meaning of the Department of Justice and how we have to represent the whole country, how it has to stand for the law. And one of us, and it may have been a young law student from Vermont, asked the question, well, what if you had somebody who had broken the law, but they were close to the president? What would you do? He said, if they'd broken the law, we would prosecute them. He said, I might not be welcome at family gatherings for a while thereafter. He said that because that Attorney General was Robert Kennedy. His brother was the president. And actually that happened. A man very close and important to his brother's election as president. The matter was brought to Attorney General Kennedy, recommending his prosecution. And of course, he was prosecuted. That's what an Attorney General should be. I declined his offer to join the Department of Justice because my wife, Marcel, and I wanted to go back home to Vermont. And I thought probably I'd never be involved with law enforcement after that. A few years later, I was the state's attorney of a county that had about a quarter of our population. And I was quickly faced with prosecuting leading Democrats and leading Republicans in our state. I remember Attorney General Kennedy said, the prosecutor has to represent everybody. The prosecutor has to uphold the law. And I prosecuted those people. I've never regretted that. I've always been supportive of attorneys general who uphold the law. Uphold the law because they're there to represent all Americans. And Madam President, as long as I'm in the Senate, I will always speak out when an attorney general does not do the job they're supposed to do, and when the attorney general does not apply the law equally and fairly to all people, applying the law, not politics. Madam President, I yield the floor and suggest you have to the quorum.